Just by way of introduction, as I mentioned earlier, the Defence Reserves Association is a member of the Ex-Service Organisation Roundtable, an advisory body that the Secretary of the Department of Veterans Affairs chairs. It's been a considerable time, I think. I would have to probably go back to 2020 or maybe even beyond that, and the last time that a Secretary of the Department of Veterans Affairs addressed the DRA conference. It was probably in Liz Cosson's time, I suspect. And of course that was during the pandemic, when at least the 2020 conference was entirely virtual. So we've moved on a lot since then. A lot of things have happened. I've been the witness, if you like, to the transformational way that Alison Frame has led the department in the last couple of years. A lot has gone on. There's been the Royal Commission into Defence and Veteran Suicide. It was a monumental task for the department to support that Royal Commission. Then the 122 recommendations and the government responses to those that came out, and I've touched on some of that already. I've always felt that from a DRA perspective, and I've been able to go to the Secretary and talk to her on a range of issues that are of interest and concern to our membership group. So we're very grateful, Secretary, to have you here with us today and invite you to address the group.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you very much for the invitation to come along. It's a pleasure to be here. I always appreciate opportunities to come and talk directly. Also want to thank you for your service. Thank you for everyone who has contributed to the Australian Defence Force. There will be many who have rendered full-time service and reserve service and both. But I just wanted to acknowledge that today and also recognise, even in what I've observed today, there's been the acknowledgement of the critical role of the reserves in the capability provided to the Australian Defence Force. So that is obviously a really important part of my role as well in supporting reservists and making sure that they have access to as many elements of DVA services as they are able to. And I know that's controversial as well, and you'll probably have questions for me about aspects of that and where the Royal Commission might have recommended some changes. So I just thought I will give you an update on where some things are at in DVA. I'm going to talk a bit about claims, about the Royal Commission response and where we're up to with that, and then about next steps and a bigger vision, I suppose. I'm very happy to take questions. And I just thought it would be good at this point. I've been in this role for 2.5 years now. So there's been a lot going on. As Mike said, a lot has happened, and we had the Royal Commission hand down their report last September. The government hand down their response last December. And we're working really assiduously on implementing those and the government contemplating many of those recommendations. But it meant that when I landed in the job, there was really this big looming spectre of the Royal Commission, and when Mike said we had to provide them with a lot of information, that was in fact nearly 500,000 pages of information across the notices to give. So it was a really mammoth exercise for the department, and it meant that there was lots of good work going on in presenting information to the Royal Commission, but to my mind as well, it wasn't always as comprehensive as I would have liked to have been in presenting to them. We are not just about responding to the questions that you have, there is also a bigger agenda going on in the Royal Commission. So I took the opportunity to provide 2 voluntary submissions to the Royal Commission. In addition to the hundreds of submissions that we were compelled to give, we did 2 that we just said that are publicly available, where we said, look, this is the bigger strategic direction for DVA, just so you know. You're getting all these other bits of information. They are useful. You obviously need those. They're related to a lot of individuals, to a lot of systems issues, but here's where DVA is going more broadly, and I'd like to talk to you a bit about that. But a lot of the Royal Commission's focus was on claims. Obviously, I arrived in the job, there was a big claims backlog that reflected DVA implementing a system a few years before that made claiming easier when they had My Service. It does intrigue me that the government recognised they were implementing a system to make claims easier and didn't contemplate what that would mean for claim numbers, because most people would predict that claim numbers would increase, in fact. As they did. And also there was that very direct encouragement of people during active service to lodge claims as well, which was a very deliberate message and was effective in also increasing claim rates. So DVA had this big backlog of claims. They hadn't had the commensurate increase in staffing numbers to respond to it. And the Royal Commission's interim report, which had landed just a few months before I commenced in the job, said to the government, you have to invest in DVA. You have to put resources in, otherwise they're simply not going to be able to respond to the demands on them. So the government accepted those recommendations, and I was very fortunate to assume the role at a time when Liz had done, my predecessor, Major General Secretary Cosson, had done enormous work to position the department for the resources that then arrived. And we had a big task to really staff up and get that claims machine moving. And it is. I'm pleased to say that it is moving faster than it has ever before. The department is bigger than it has been since they were running repatriation hospitals. The department has not been as big as it is. I don't think it should get any bigger. I would not like for it to get any bigger. I don't think there is a need for that. I think there is a need for it to get more efficient, and I'd love for the department to have better ICT systems that could really assist with that. So many of our manual tasks are related to the clunky old, disparate systems that we have, but I'm not seeking for the department to get any bigger than it has now. We have a vastly increased number of delegates determining claims. We got through all the backlog of claims that the Royal Commission had signalled or had stipulated needed to be addressed, which was the claims that had been unallocated. All of those claims have been determined, apart from 0.01%, I think, that are obviously complicated claims. But that's just one part of the story. We're also processing claims much faster than we have been before. I hope that's people's experience. I know that still means that people will be sitting here thinking, well, my claim's still been 300 days. There will still be instances of that. And we're still working through backlogs of claims that permanent impairment in particular, not initial liability, that have been with the department for quite some time. But it is all coming down. It really is coming down. And for claims that have been lodged since 1 January last year, we are meeting most of those targets in the Veteran Recognition Act about 100 days, processing claims in 100 days. So we're getting there. We know we can get there. We've just got to keep working through that backlog. But what I wanted to mention that is a real complication on that is that claim rates keep increasing. So at the same time as we are working more productively and we have data demonstrating that the increase in productivity and determinations is well in excess of the increase in staffing numbers. So we have also got productivity improvements in the mix there. We've changed some processes. We have got some system enhancements. We're working differently with the sector. Mike is here and Del also from ESORT. We're working really collaboratively with stakeholders and also with Defence. And so we've really realised some improvements to our systems and our processes as well that have seen productivity increase well in excess of the staffing increases. But we are still struggling, I will say to you, we're still struggling with the demand that is coming in. It's increasing, continues to increase, including from reservists and serving members and veterans. And we think to a significant extent that reflects pent-up demand. There had been people sitting around for a long time thinking, what's the point? I won't even bother, nothing is happening. And clearly they started to recognise things are moving, so there's some good reasons for that increase in demand. There is also some reasons that are concerning, and you might have seen some media this week about the department putting out some guidelines that are far more direct about our expectations of providers. This is not about veterans or serving members or reservists, it's about providers who are in the middle here and advocates. And there is increasing awareness, and it's really clear to us, it's not anything we're imagining and it's not minor, that there are some advocates who are operating on a commercial basis, who are generating a lot of claims. They are working with medical professionals and making lots of referrals and getting lots of tests done that we're not asking for. So we get all these bills for expensive tests that we weren't seeking, which have caused great inconvenience, I'm sure, to the veteran. And so we're wanting to be tougher on that, saying we're not going to pay for tests unless we ask for them. We're not seeking to send veterans for unnecessary tests. We have a very high acceptance rate for claims. It would be not feasible for any other insurance company to have the acceptance rate that DVA has. But that is that's our role. Military service is unique and the compensation scheme is unique. So that's not anything that we are uncomfortable with. But we are uncomfortable with veterans being mucked around and encouraged in some practices that they're probably not even aware of how much some of these connections are in place and what's actually occurring here. So We are pushing harder on that. You will hear more about that, and it's not a message that we'll resile from about holding providers to account and advocates. We've had a very constructive initiative come out of the ESORT. Mike von Berg, who heads the RAR Association, convened a group across the whole of the ESORT, and they have led the formation of an Institute of Advocates, which has already started. Mike has led that. It is going to be really significant in terms of increasing the quality of advocates in the sector. It's a regulation that's going to be self-administered from within the sector, not from the department. They have a very eminent board that Mike has assembled there, and they will be applying minimum standards to advocates, and they will be holding advocates to account for practices. And if there are advocates operating on a percentage basis, for example, commissions basis, which some are now, they will not be accepted as members of the Institute of Advocates, and that enables us as the department to say, we prefer you to go to someone who is registered with the Institute of Advocates. People will always have choice. We're not going to take away that choice. The choice means you will be paying more from any payments that are forthcoming, but we do have an obligation to make sure that choice is upheld, but that choice needs to be made in a full knowledge of what else is available here. Is the same expertise available at no cost? And is there recognition of some standards and some ethical standards that would give me more confidence? It also would be reflected in the department's practices as well. If someone is registered with the Institute of Advocates, you can safely anticipate that all our data analytics would apply less scrutiny to those claims because of the standards we recognise with those advocates and the role that the Institute of Advocates is realising. So it could result in faster claims, in fact, because of the recognition that there is an established relationship. A lot of these advocates who will be registered with the Institute will be working through ESOs, and they've been doing this work reliably for decades. We need to increase the number of people doing that. I think that's a very legitimate criticism at the moment for veterans and serving members to say, well, there's not enough of them, and this other person said they'd charge me money, but they'll do it next week and they're available now. I think that is a legitimate criticism. So the department has to move very quickly. There is a Royal Commission recommendation about increasing best grants, or increasing the number of paid advocates, it says, which we currently do through a grant process. We'll be looking very quickly at what is a way to do that, to realise that and train up advocates in the sector who are paid for their work, working through ESOs, and then you have a lot of volunteer advocates working around them as well, supporting them in that work. So I hope that gives you a bit of a picture of claims and where we're up to. We're also using some AI in claims processing. I'm very clear. I like to talk about this because I like people to know that it is coming. We're doing it now. We're testing, and it is coming. At the moment, we're just using dummy data in a GovAI platform that's very secure. There is no real data being used, and veterans will be consulted on before we get to using any real data. And it will all have to be obviously in a safe and secure environment, subject to all cyber checks and privacy impact assessments and everything that needs to go with that use. It will not be about AI making decisions. It will be the use of AI to support decisions and to make decisions that much faster when it can trawl through hundreds of pages of medical reports and do immediate matching to statements of principles and where a delegate would need to look in making a determination. Our testing indicates that that can be a massive efficiency. We're testing it at the moment. We're hoping to actually be using it with live data on a consent basis by the end of the year, where we would give people a choice about being willing to participate in a trial of use of that data in the GovAI production environment. So we're really leaning in, and we're at the forefront of departments that are looking to use AI to support decisions and render their processes more effective. I want to talk a bit more about the Royal Commission response. So the government, as I said, announced that response in December. We've been working hard this year on implementing certain aspects of that response. Two of them were really direct to DVA in terms of requesting or requiring DVA to do a co-design approach on a new wellbeing agency for transition and for veteran wellbeing. The Royal Commission were very specific, and the government agreed this recommendation that there should be a new agency established within DVA, or I think executive agency reporting to the Secretary of DVA is what they stipulated in their recommendation, that oversees veteran wellbeing in a far more integrated way with Defence. And it's integrated now. It's not like there's never the twain shall meet. There is a lot of connection, as you would expect. We just want to take that to the next level, and the agency gives us an opportunity to do that, and particularly in regard to transition, with regard to people transitioning from service. Reserves are obviously a really big part of that as well. So we've done a extensive co-design process over the last 6 months, meetings in every state, lots of online meetings, online submissions, working through all of those to take some proposals to government about what might that agency look like. I am hoping, I mentioned earlier some of our ICT constraints, and setting up an agency that will leverage heavily capability that already exists in DVA and Defence. Does, however, give us an opportunity to look at ICT investment that might really position that agency for a greater connectivity. And we really want to take that to the next level about data relating to service being available after service to streamline provision of support without us having to do manual requests back to Defence. So the Veteran Wellbeing Agency, whatever it's actually called, is the subject of some really concerted effort now, and there will be proposals taken to government, and you will hear more about what shape the government expects that to be. We also had a co-design consultation on a peak body for ex-service organisations. That was another recommendation of the Royal Commission. That one is probably one of the more controversial ones, it's safe to say, do you think? So that's going to be something that we will continue to work with the sector on. That will have to be driven by the sector. I don't think we'll get a consensus view, but the government will not impose a model that doesn't have majority support or quite a significant movement behind it, where ex-service organisations appreciate a role that can be played in coordinating across the sector. I certainly think, myself personally, I think there is a lot of value in it if the design could be right and organisations could work really collaboratively together. One of the big challenges for me in DVA is that we have quite a strict legislative remit. It's about compensation, it's about rehabilitation, it's about health and other services, and we do commemorations, as you know. We are quite limited then in certain aspects of veteran services that I don't have a statutory authority to deliver. Whereas ex-service organisations, some of them with quite significant resources, could deliver and really partner and collaborate with the department to provide a better suite of services for veterans and their families. I'm thinking specifically of psychosocial programs, a whole range of things, activities that we know veterans benefit from, that I don't have the authority to fund. But if we worked with the sector, it could be that we fund all medical aspects and they are able to fund equine therapy or any kind of activity that a veteran enjoys doing. That is beneficial, that's indisputable. It's just easier for ESOs to move quickly and rapidly to fund those kind of activities, to fund emergency support, fund a lot of family supports. So we really would want to partner, and I see it as an equal partnership. DVA is not the centre, veteran and their family are at the centre, the serving member are at the centre of this support system, and DVA is orbiting around, as are the ex-service organisations and other organisations that are offering support. So I think there is something to be gained there, and we will continue to explore that one and see if we can get to something that the sector can embrace. Where I wanted to go before I open for questions though, and I'm sure you want to ask me about recommendation 90B, so I'm ready to have a response on that one. But I did want to mention, I've talked about claims and I've talked about the Royal Commission, and in an opening with claims I've really perpetuated something that I'm trying to move beyond, which is to establish a new appreciation that the department is not just about claims. For some reason, and you can see it over a few years how it has evolved, and the Royal Commission certainly sharpened that focus by getting so much negative feedback from veterans and serving members about claim times, which was a significant issue. So it meant they focused a lot on claims in their recommendations as well. But the department is about so much more than that. It is about holistic, comprehensive support for veterans and family members and serving members. You know, with Open Arms, we have half of the support in Open Arms provided to serving members, in fact. It's pretty even split between serving members and veterans. But I think it's important to remind ourselves as we're moving forward in One Act next year, so we achieve the legislative harmonisation that the Royal Commission had recommended, which was no mean feat, and will be a really significant enhancement to veteran services over the ensuing years. So that commences next year, 1 July 2026. We're moving forward with One Act, the Military Rehabilitation and Compensation Act, the MRCA, which I'm sure many of you know well. But I think it's important to reflect, it is the MRCA, it has an R in it, Rehabilitation and Compensation Act. And I do think there's been a perception of the department for the last few years that's entirely understandable, that has really rendered us, or a view of us as the military compensation, administering the Military Compensation Act only. And I would really like to shift the focus and a recognition that DVA is expected to do so much more than provide compensation, which will always be that will always be part of what we do, and we're not trying to shirk that or diminish that in any way, but we do need to enhance our service provision with rehabilitation, cutting edge treatments earlier. I would like to get challenged more in the community about what are you doing for that, rather than all the time, why are you taking so long with processing claims? You need to process my claim faster. I really would like more questions from senators, ex-service organisations, veterans, everyone in the community, in the public, saying, why aren't you doing more to assist? You should be doing more. You should have the best treatments available for people. If it's something that affects serving people disproportionately, DVA should be there testing new therapies and approaches, making those available, readily available as soon as possible. So that is what we will be taking many more active steps towards. You will hear a lot more about that. We're already doing a lot, they always have been, but it's something I think we can really take to the next level. We have a chief psychiatrist. Since I commenced in the job, I appointed a chief psychiatrist to sit alongside our chief health officer. So there's the recognition of, that physical health, but also how significant mental health is for serving members and veterans as well. And we have a chief psychiatrist who is a veteran, served for many years as a private before he did medicine, and deployed in Afghanistan as a psychiatrist. So he has a deep experience himself of service, and really committed to serving veterans. So we've got a lot of the right ingredients now. We have an authority from government to do what we need to do to assist veterans. I never get pressure about spend less on services for veterans. My pressure is about you only have this much in the department to do that, but there's no expectation of me about reducing what we do for veterans, and I think we can spend that money differently and deliver some better outcomes. And in that regard, even on Thursday, I visited with the head of Open Arms. I went to a centre on the Sunshine Coast for brain health and mental health, brain science and mental health, I think, where they are, Sir Angus Houston had asked me to go and visit. He's the Chancellor of that university, and they are using a treatment for PTSD that is achieving some really significant results. It's low cost, it's not invasive, it's something that we could certainly look at doing on a bigger scale and making available to veterans sooner rather than later. I spoke to our chief psychiatrist about it, and he said he already does a variation of that kind of therapy as well. It was really interesting. All it's about is taking a tablet, a beta blocker, which my dad was taking for his blood pressure for decades. Though many people would know about beta blockers, they're not sophisticated pharmaceuticals at all and very cheap. And they do a therapy where you take a beta blocker before you have a session with a therapist or a psychiatrist, not necessarily a psychiatrist, could be a psychologist or just a trained clinician, and recounting you pick a particular memory and you have to write it all down in great detail, and you're supervised in sharing that experience. And obviously they're the memories that are associated with that deep emotional response that is traumatic and all the physiological symptoms that come with that. But by taking the beta blocker before this treatment, it diminishes the emotional response that's associated with the memory, and then they repeat this over 6 weeks. And at the end have measured that the memory is still intact, it's still a bad memory, but the emotional response that accompanies it has been dampened over time through going through that same memory under supervision. It's just interesting. I'm just sharing it with you because it was interesting to me, and the chief psychiatrist said, oh yeah, we've all been doing that with different kinds of medications. So these are the kinds of things that I think DVA could be really leaning into, and I'd love to be really associated with that and get a lot more questions about what are you doing with things like that, with treatments for lumbar spondylosis and all these conditions that are really high incidence, tinnitus. We went to Australian Hearing a few months ago to look at some really significantly new treatments for tinnitus, one of which they have a patent for and they're providing to the US VA. So wouldn't that be great to be able to have that here in Australia? Such a common condition that affects serving men and women, and we would love to be able to offer some really innovative treatments there. So that's where I wanted to leave you with a sense of the Royal Commission recommended certain things that the government is working on in terms of contemplating how are we going to implement those things. They've come out with a position on what they've agreed in principle. There are only very small number 2 that they did not agree with. So you will hear more about implementation, how those things are going to get implemented. But I want to position that implementation within a broader strategic shift for DVA as well. So they've made some good recommendations. Government said, yes, we'll do that. But there's more that DVA can do. That is not going to singularly improve veteran wellbeing. We can take a far more holistic approach. We can shift more to early intervention treatment and continue to do that compensation role, but with a much more holistic lens about veteran wellbeing. So that's where we are attempting to go in responding to the Royal Commission and more broadly as well. I hope that gives you an overview of where the department's up to. Happy to take any questions, Mike. I don't want to get in the way of people's lunch. I'm happy to stand out there and answer any questions as well.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Secretary. Fantastic. And it's very kind of you to stay for a sandwich and have a chat to people. But I might just field a couple of questions, and I might just lead off to preempt the inevitable question, if I may. There's been some obviously we've had some discussion about where recommendation 90B and government's agreement in principle to that for the further extension of non-liability healthcare to all reservists is actually tracking.
Yeah.
And the related issue, which we've also canvassed during the course of the morning's discussion, Phil Winters here from RSL, of course, as well, around the definition of veteran. Because this was canvassed during, as you know, during the design workshop on the Veteran and Family Wellbeing Agency, where one of those threshold questions was, what is a veteran? We used to know that it was someone who'd rendered operational service. We've had the Veterans Covenant of 2018-19 that talked about a veteran being anyone who'd served in the ADF. And subsequent to that, we've had a more nuanced definition in terms of access to services that talks about a veteran in the context of being able to access services, including open arms, as actually being anyone who'd served in the permanent force for at least 1 day, or a reservist who served for at least 1 day's CFTS.
Yes, that's right. That's right.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks, Mike. On 90B, and that's why I wanted to talk to you about that strategic direction and where we're wanting to go, because it obviously aligns in terms of expanding treatment and access to things. And non-liability healthcare and access to mental health services clearly fits. The government has agreed that in principle. They established a task force in the Department of Prime Minister and Cabinet that is currently looking at all of those recommendations and will be providing advice to the government about how they might do that, what could that look like, and the government will need to make budget decisions about that because it will cost money. For me in DVA, I would very much like to do the work to demonstrate that it will cost money up front, but it can also save you money in the long term. And even if you put the money to one side, it delivers a better wellbeing outcome, which is why the department exists and certainly is the objective. So we would like to do some of that work alongside as well to say, yes, there's a cost, you'll need to think about that in budget, but it's in a broader context about what happens downstream and how much better outcomes are realised downstream, what are the impacts of that on service delivery in terms of what the department's asked to do, and also to measure as much as we possibly can what that earlier access means in terms of wellbeing and success and greater, better outcomes for veterans. So 90B is with that PM&C task force. It's agreed in principle. There will need to be decisions made about that in a budget context. So I'll keep the ESORT updated on anything more I hear about that, but that's where that one's up to at the moment. Definition of veteran is not being actively looked at the moment, Mike, in terms of contemplating a change to that legislative definition. But what I wanted to signal today is that we continue to look at the vast array of services DVA offers and whether there can be different eligibility criteria for that outside of a definitional change in the legislation to a veteran. So, you know, there's obviously Open Arms, there's a whole range of other programs, and it could be that with a program eligibility change, reservists are able to access a lot of things without us necessarily changing the legislative definition, which isn't the first focus at the moment.
Thank you, Secretary.
I imagine that's disappointing, isn't it?
Well,
we're on it.
Our view is that we have a plain language definition of a veteran that was in the Veteran Covenant, which was anyone who has served one day in the ADF is a veteran. But in its interpretation, it's a more nuanced and restrictive definition. Yeah. As I said, it's anyone who served in the ADF for at least one day, so long as you've served that one day at a minimum in the Permanent Defence Force,
yeah.
Or in the case of a reservist, you've done at least one day CFTS. That is not the same as anyone who has served in the ADF is a veteran.
Yeah.
That's the point.
I appreciate that.
Yeah. Fritz.
Thank you, Matt. Secretary, thanks for the conversation. But prevention being better than the cure, how's your feedback mechanism to the department in that? I'll give you an example. You notice through DVA that all cooks get a bad lower back. Do we have a feedback mechanism that says what is our fitness program for cooks to help prevent lower back problems? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And we've got a feedback mechanism, but it can be better. And so it's everything to me should be subject to continuous improvement. I had an uncle who was a very senior executive in Toyota for many years, and grew up for decades reading books on continuous improvement and the Toyota way. But we are improving our data analytics capability for a start. So in the last few years, we put a lot more investment into that, and that's part of identifying those patterns, identifying that, hey, this is what's happening every time this kind of service is translating disproportionately to these kinds of injuries. So that's the information. We need to find those patterns, and you need a good analytics capability, which we didn't really have much. It was, again, about significant resource constraints in DVA meant they just didn't have as much there as they needed. We've invested in that a lot in the last few years. That is giving us a lot better information. The most important part that your question goes to, though, is how is that going back to Defence? So we've recently, in the last 6 to 12 months, got a seat on the Defence, I think it's called Workplace Health and Safety or OC Health and Safety Committee, but they have a committee chaired by CPERS, I think. I'm not on it, so I'm not actually, but it's a DepSec from the department who is on it. And who is bringing this data into the room. Because I wrote to CDF about being on that committee, and I said to my team, there's no point being on the committee just to sit in the room. You have to take the data that's going to be useful to Defence so that then they can contemplate what might we need to change. And we've got a whole range of things in that space, including, as well as the straight out injury stuff that you mentioned, and there'll be many of those kinds of patterns. Also, patterns about bases and particular claim types where clearly there's a word of mouth about this is a claim type, and you can see geographic patterns as well, not related to service type but related to geography, which wouldn't be super surprising, I suppose. But again, you need the analytics to identify that, and then we can take that back to Defence and have those conversations. So it's getting better. It's still got a long way to go. We're still expanding all the time as well, the straight-through processing, and that's going to increase under the new Act, where we've expanded presumptive liability provisions. So that commences middle of next year. What that means is we'll just keep expanding the suite of service types for which certain injuries are directly accepted. There's no initial liability process. If you spent this many years in the Navy going up and down ladders, all these conditions are automatically accepted without needing to demonstrate anything more than the proof of service for that duration. So we've already got a lot in that category, but we'll keep building on that as well. And so it's all designed to just continue to streamline for the veteran themselves and reduce the impost in them and constantly having to prove a liability for something.
Paul Irving.
Alison, Paul Irving, I just, as you know, the DRA's been pushing for a long time for the non-liability health care card issue, and we're well aware of the issue of the costings involved. We know that the regional decision to not allow reservists that hadn't done any full-time service to access the card because Defence didn't know how many reservists there were. So it comes down to the costing of this proposal. And we understand, as you said, the government said this is agreed in principle, so I want to know what the cost is. And that's where it really is important to us, how this is panning out. We've heard today that the 34-year-old RAAF female reservist that you're aware of that couldn't access Open Arms could access the department's employee assistance program. So it's just a different cost centre. There's no different cost to the government in relation to that service. But for those reservists that are no longer undertaking active service, if the department's going to say, oh, there was 500,000 of those that might still be alive since the reserve was re-raised in 1948, and they get an average of 4 counselling sessions per year, that's going to cost billions and millions of dollars. It's our assessment that would be very few people that would, reservists that would access the counselling services because of their age, their maturity, that they've been in civilian employment and they've had domestic situations quite different to the regular people who are moving home on a regular basis. Most of them are situated in the same home that they've been into for many years. So there's a lot of factors that are quite different. So from our perspective, how it's costed is really important and what assumptions are built into that costing. Is that something that we can access?
Thank you for that question. It's not something that's been worked out as far as I know. So I definitely don't have any issue with working with the DRA around assumptions that might inform those costings. And they won't be done by DVA, they'll be done in the Department of Finance. And they'll do variations as well. They'll do, if it's taken up at 20% or 30% or 40%. I do know that they've already ascertained that the costs are not equivalent to, the large number of reservists, whatever the aggregate number is, because there are so many who already do qualify and receive those benefits because of, working on COVID response and bushfires, and there's a really significant cohort there that they've already factored in. So that takes the numbers down immediately. But then we do need to work through those assumptions, as you say, Paul, about what do we think is the uptake for these different age ranges and categories and why. I think that would be something it'd be good to talk to DRA about and get your input, and then we'll work with the Department of Finance about options and costings, but I'm not aware that they've done that work yet.
And I also raised in passing earlier on, Secretary, the fact that we were advocating this also on behalf to some extent of that group of 35,000 men who served in the National Service Scheme post-1965, who opted to serve for 6 years in the then Citizens Military Force. And of course, that never entailed any form of equivalent service to one-day CFTS.
Yes, yeah.
They also, and most of those, of course, are senior people now and would be accessing other benefits, but it's more the recognition of their service at the time and the wellbeing aspect to that. Yeah.
And I have many interactions with them on that also. But I recognise that's because it's significant.
Yeah.
We take it to government and they'll make a decision about what they want to do in that respect.
Excuse me for a moment. I'm just going to look at our online. We might break very shortly for lunch, but I will just, I think we've cleared, other than a couple of residual questions. What percentage of additional claims, this is the question online, what percentage of additional claims has come from fee-for-service advocates, apropos your earlier commentary about wanting to reduce that number overall?
In the last 12 months, it's just under 20%.
Which is significant.
It's significant. The growth is significant. It's really rapid. This is really rapid. DVA haven't been watching this for years. there was no incentive to do this until everything started moving much faster. So it's only been a good opportunity quite recently, but it's a very recent phenomenon. And as I said, I think that there is an appreciation that there need to be more advocates available through ESOs. Most people still do their claims through My Service without any advocate as well. And DVA are doing a campaign about that, putting more information out into the sector. And we need that anchor point to say to people, don't assume you need an advocate in the first instance either, because just over 50% don't use any advocate. They do it themselves quite effectively. And My Service is, designed for that. But we do want to say, if you need an advocate, think first about who you get. I mean, I remember I was sharing at ESOP, Mike, that I met someone on a trip who was very happy with the service they were getting, but they were paying 13% of their permanent impairment claims, and they thought they were very happy with that. And I just felt disappointed to hear that, because I thought you could get that from an ESO, from a really experienced advocate, and yes, we need to have more of them, but you could get that without having to pay that percentage.
And that's an outcome that you only get once.
Yeah, this was someone who'd served for nearly 25 years, special forces. Like, I can imagine they would have had a list of claims there that were legitimate claims at the end of their service career. I just thought that's a lot to pay, and I really wanted to make sure that people are aware of different options when they reach that point.
Yeah, fabulous.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Secretary.
Thank you.